This is actually going to be slightly more challenging because the chat is closed. So maybe I won't ask for answers in the chat, but just have y'all start thinking about what celebration food is to you. If anyone wants to come off chat, I would love to hear it. But as you're thinking about it, I can share kind of what celebration food has been to me. You know, what's really typical. I'm speaking from North Carolina in the US. Like there's cake. Cake means celebration, right? That was one of the biggest things with turning into adult. I'm like, I can have a cake when it's not my birthday. This is awesome. I mean, and then also like traditional celebration foods can lean into, and I just said that, tradition and celebration kind of overlap. So we have the celebration and tradition of Thanksgiving in the US. And what is most typical in my family is turkey, mashed potatoes, probably an apple pie, all those sorts of things that kind of make that tradition. And the reason why I am kind of starting with this is because food is really special when it comes to our culture, just kind of who we are, how we relate to our families, where we come from, and all of that. Which means it's really hard to change even when the food system is broken. So all of this taken into account, it kind of begs the question, because there is an estimated 10 billion people going to be on this planet by about 2050. So already we know that hunger, malnutrition, famine are issues. We know that how we create food is directly causing problems in our world. So how are we going to feed these 10 billion people, but not just to get them enough calories and nutrition, but how are we going to do it sustainably, efficiently, and safely? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. So this very loose agenda, again, if anyone wants to jump in and ask questions, you are welcome to. Just because I know that sometimes saving it for the Q&A can kind of mean that like I didn't make sense the entire time. So I'm happy to change if necessary. But I'll walk you through kind of like why alternative proteins are a worthwhile endeavor. The organization I work for, GFI, and our theory of change. I'll briefly touch on the 3 different pillars of alternative proteins because there's some really cool science in there. And then just what you can do about it as students, as scholars. So this is our driving question. As I said, we need to feed a lot of people. And we also know that our existing food system is doing so, but doing so in a really dangerous way. I will be, I'm open to share these slides afterwards, so no need to, write everything down in its specifics. But we do know that industrialized animal agriculture, as an example, is one of the top emitters of climate change producing chemicals, including CO2, including methane and other chemicals as well. And that's just, that's something that we really can change. And it's something directly driving some of the biggest problems in our world today. Then there's a lot of it comes down to efficiency. So 75% of agricultural land is used for raising livestock, but it doesn't produce 3/4 of our food. And finally, safety. This one hits home to me because I actually have a family member currently battling a antibiotic-resistant infection. This is something that many of you, I'm sure, are already familiar with. Animals consume more than 2 times as many medically important antibiotics than humans do. And that is a large driver of antibiotic-resistant infections. So for all of these reasons, we need to do something about it. And when we talk about industrial animal agriculture and trying to get away from it, I fully acknowledge that a lot of times the conversations start and sometimes end at the idea of animal suffering. And that is true. Up to 3 trillion animals per year are dedicated for human consumption. I'm not going to focus on that because, frankly, that is a value judgment. And I can't tell you to change your beliefs in terms of the sentience, in terms of how valuable an animal is. That really doesn't matter for what I am trying to say. We also know these are the things that are like numbers based, not really a value judgment, but just like what is objectively good, that the WHO and other health bodies have indicated the most likely cause of the next pandemic is the consequences of industrialized animal agriculture. We also know that food security is impacted by relying on animal agriculture. For those of you, especially in the US, you'll remember at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, all of the meatpacking plants had some serious issues, which threw food security into question, even in the US. And then there is that environmental devastation that I had indicated before. Now, I can go into any more detail if you would like on any of these. For the sake of time, I'm just going to focus on environmental devastation and just kind of break down what I said previously about those stats of land use. I will say this one is coming from a different measuring body, so the numbers are slightly different, but the story is the same. So we take land, and a certain percentage of that is habitable. A solid 50% of habitable land is dedicated to agriculture. From that, about 75%, 3/4, is dedicated to livestock, which does not produce nearly as much protein supply or calorie supply as the land that is dedicated to it. And we also know that directly replacing these products, animal products, with the technology we have today goes a really long way in protecting our environment. So these are specific consumer products as compared to the animal product that they are replacing. So just taking the Impossible Burger as one example, when compared to raising cows for a beef burger, it decreases land use by 96%. And frankly, I was really skeptical when I first saw this. I just started at GFI in December. I'm like, there's no way. 96% seems made up. I looked into it. It is very much evidence-based. This also follows for greenhouse gas emissions, water use, and eutrophication of aquatic ecosystems, which, again, if we have any marine biologists or others in the audience, you'll know is a very serious problem when it comes to the overall ocean health, which then basically is the start of all ecosystems. And it's really true for pretty much any alternative protein product. The environmental impacts are severely diminished when compared to the animal products it is replacing. But all of this taken together, it's just true that we value meat. And by we, I mean like pretty much all humans. So what you see on the bottom box is if everybody ate like the average citizen of the world, we would be needing 300 million tons of animal products by 2013. It has gone up since then. But per capita, United States is, I believe, the 3rd highest consumer of animal products in the world. And so we know as countries get more developed, wealthier, that the trend is animal consumption will increase. This begs another question of why not just eat plants? Some of you may be vegetarian or vegan, and you've been happy with beans, lentils, tempeh, whatever that might be. We also know that the vast majority of people aren't looking for that. They are omnivores, flexitarians, sometimes carnivores, whatever you want to describe them as. And those are the majority of the people that want a burger. They want a steak. They won't be happy with a black bean burger. And that is where the Good Food Institute comes in. So we are also a 501c3 nonprofit. We are funded entirely by philanthropy. And we focus to make alternative proteins more accessible. Alternative proteins being food products that directly replace animal products. So not a black bean burger, but something like an Impossible Burger, where, you know, when done right, you cannot tell the difference. We do have multiple wings of our work. We work around the world, and we focus not only on the research and development for science and technology, but we engage directly with companies, whether that be food manufacturers or grocery stores, to make sure that those things get on the shelves, and also policy. Because unfortunately, yeah, we do need to get the government involved when it comes to funding in the way that there has been significant funding with solar energy, as an example. And this all comes down to our theory of change, that we know asking people to give up the foods they love, their celebration foods, their tradition foods, isn't working. The vegan movement has been very loud, very strong, and per capita meat consumption is increasing at the same time. So instead of that, our goal is to change the default option so that everyone can have products that are as, if not more, delicious, affordable, and accessible. that's when we can come to the exciting products that are on the landscape of alternative proteins. So we have three pillars, the first of which being plant-based meats. So these are probably the ones you're most familiar with. It's where you take plants and replicate the experience of eating a burger, eating a chicken nugget, whatever that might be. And we can do this because the things that make up animals also make up plants. We've got the protein, the fats, the vitamins, the minerals. We've got some bonus things in plants like dietary fiber that animal products do not have. And there we go. That does not mean it's an easy thing to do, which is why if you have had some plant-based products, especially if you had plant-based products like 5 or 10 years ago, you know, like something's off. It's hard to put your finger on, but like the texture is different. Sometimes it's like softer. It doesn't have that same bite. A lot of that comes down to the fact that plant proteins and animal proteins on a fundamental level in the secondary and tertiary structures are just organized differently. So a lot of what the science is trying to do with plant products, wrong direction, is coax those proteins into more of that fibrous structure. And you can see here, there is so much scientific opportunity to really optimize these products from before the crops are even grown to after all of the components are put together and try and make that fiber exactly replicate the animal experience. And like I said, this is probably the most common, the most well-known. And you probably recognize a good number of these products here, anything from Tofurkey to Impossible to Morningstar. Then you have fermentation-based products. And by and large, this is an enabling technology. When I say fermentation, y'all will probably think of things like beer, wine, making alcohol, but that really just kind of is an umbrella term for microbes doing something to their feedstock, their product, to make something else that you can eat. Sourdough being another great example of fermentation. Those, all of the things that I described are examples of traditional fermentation, but technology has advanced so that we have biomass fermentation. Corn is probably the most common example of this. I know that was a staple in my household growing up, even in the 90s. And also precision fermentation, which is kind of the newest technology that has come on board. Now, precision fermentation allows for you to make one exact protein that you are looking for, or another compound that maybe isn't even proteins. But this is how Impossible gets their heme that you might have heard about, that allows for that bloody taste and texture, that little tang of iron. Also, I want to point out that this is not dedicated just for food. If you or someone you know is diabetic and takes insulin to manage their diabetes, there is a 96 or 98% chance that they use a product of precision fermentation. That is how we manufacture insulin at this point. So it is an established technology that is really exciting because it allows us to do so many different things. Finally, the third pillar, we have cultivated meat. And the difference of this is it is not a meat analog. It's not replicating meat. It is meat. Essentially, you are cultivating animal cells in tissue culture, which is very similar to tissue culture you would be doing in any sort of biomedical research, but the muscle, the fat, the connective tissue, so that you can have essentially the chicken breast without the rest of the chicken. And you basically take the same steps as you would for any tissue culture, starting from a biopsy, which I will point out, lets the chicken walk away. It's a biopsy that basically is as big as if you've ever gotten like something on your skin checked. It doesn't really change your life that much. And cultivated meat is frankly the one that gets the most media attention. It started just 10 years ago with a burger that was more than $100,000 to make. But since then, it really has expanded to meatballs, shrimp dumplings, chicken, and it has allowed for something as crazy as the mammoth meatball you might have seen a couple of weeks ago, a 10-kilogram cut of meat, as well as people starting to eat this in restaurants, at least if you live in Singapore. But here's hoping in the US, it will be coming to restaurants by the end of this year. There is some good indications that that will be happening. A lot of people do ask me like, all right, so you work at the Good Food Institute, which one's going to win? It's probably going to be a mix of all of them. I mean, the Impossible Burger is a good example. It is primarily plant-based, but has that fermentation component in it. And there are other companies that are adding cultivated fat to plant-based proteins because there are positives for all of these different technologies. Final thing I will say about this space is that it's not just startups. It's not just Silicon Valley. You know, Tyson, Cargill, Purdue are all working in the alternative protein space, kind of for the same reason that oil companies are working with renewable energy. They recognize the market is changing and they don't want to be left out. I do want to do a quick check-in because I know I've probably already gone over my time. Would you like me to end there, or do I have a couple more minutes to talk about how students interact with this?
Oh yeah, we have more time since we have extra like buffer from Allison. So
Okay.
you're free to go on.
Okay. Apologies if anyone who is not Haley just wants me to shut up, but I'm going to keep going for like 2 more minutes. So all of this to say, and you may have experienced this going to the grocery store, like even if you want to reduce your meat consumption, if you see Beyond Beef and it's like $4 per a burger, and then you can get a meat burger for $1, it's really hard to make that calculation for yourself, especially if money is tight. So it needs to compete on price, but also it just needs to taste as good, right? And here is where it is really exciting to get in on essentially the ground floor. Think about this in terms of like the computer, the internet age in the early 90s. There is so much to do. And I want to point everybody to our solutions database. Everything that GFI does is open access, open source. So you can basically get any of our information on our website, gfi.org. And it allows you to kind of see what are the white spaces? What are the opportunities that still need to be figured out for alternative proteins to match on price, taste, and convenience? So I personally, like I said, I work with university student groups. My project is called the Alt Protein Project. So whatever universities you are calling in from, if your university does not already have an Alt Protein Project, which we are now in 57 universities, we're going to open up applications early next year. I'd encourage you to take a look at this because I have seen firsthand students being direct drivers of coursework, of professors starting new research initiatives, and just allowing people to know what alternative proteins are. And it's not just scientists, it's not just engineers who can plug in to the value chain here. You know, whether you work in agriculture, administration, government, there are ways that you can actually contribute to this industry. I just want to give a brief shout out to some of our amazing students. Like I said, I'm not just throwing this out there like, oh, students can change the world. They really do. We've had students spin off their own companies with optimized foods. We have had students design and then get for credit courses in their universities, like what Johns Hopkins has done. They have interfaced directly with some of the most senior people in the alternative protein industry through panel talks, career conferences, and the like, and both securing their own money for research projects, as Aiden did, but also the alternative protein research in his lab after he graduated with his PhD is continuing. So he not only built a project for himself, he built a project for every student that comes after him, which is just absolutely fantastic. So now with that, I will say thank you. Again, please make use of our resources. Everything is open access, anything from the science to the industry, we can help you out. And if you want to reach out, I always love kind of talking with people about the opportunities in the space. You have my email. You can set up a time to meet with me. So thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much for your insightful discussion on the topic of alternative proteins as a solution to the ramifications of environmental degradation and other issues. Your presentation really aligned with our goals for educating students for current events in the future. We really appreciate that. If anyone has questions right now, you're free to unmute or write them down and save them for the chat Q&A later. I know it's a bit easier to access. But with that being said, next we have Seth Baum.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we
Excellent.
can.
So my name is Seth Baum. I'm Executive Director of the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute. We are also a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And I'm just going to speak with no slides. I don't have any slides to accompany this. And so we work on global catastrophic risk. And in my remarks, I'll explain what we mean by global catastrophic risk and what sorts of work we do on that, and just how to understand the concept of global catastrophic risk more generally. But before diving into that, I'd like to say just a little bit about my own personal backgrounds and how it is that I came to be involved in this particular topic. I had perhaps a bit of an unconventional career path. I originally started out studying engineering. I actually have a bachelor's degree in optics of all things, because that was a program that my university had that just seemed interesting at the time. And I liked engineering, but I didn't love it. I came from an engineering family. My father was an engineer, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was kind of always a natural default path for me. But I was kind of living a double life of, studying engineering by day, and then was like a kind of do-gooder by night, if you will. I mean, not literally day and night, but I was always involved in lots of student groups on campus and community projects, things of that sort. Not too different, I think, from the organization that you guys have, which really seems fantastic. I should say thank you so much for the invitation. And I hit a point. I was in grad school. I was doing a master's degree in electrical engineering, following up on the optics work that I had done in undergrad. And I really found that this was not what I ultimately wanted to be doing, that I wanted to find some way of merging kind of the two halves of my lives, my desire to make the world a better place, but then also the more technical work that I had been doing as an engineer. And I started studying ethics, moral philosophy, which at the time was totally foreign to me. With an engineering background, I barely even knew what the word ethics meant, but it was basically like the study of what is right and wrong and what people should or shouldn't do. And okay, so having continued to study ethics for many years since then, the big point that I would make is that there are a lot of different views on what is right and wrong and good and bad and so on. And it's kind of up to us to decide for ourselves what we think is right and wrong. But for myself, what I found compelling was essentially the idea of trying to make the world a better place. And not just make it a better place a little bit and call it a day and move on, but really try to do as much as I can to make the world a better place. And as far as what it meant to me to make the world a better place would be improving the lives of people. And actually noted the previous talk, which was excellent, by the way. Thank you so much for the presentation, Nathan. That was fantastic. Also non-human animals and so on, and to care about roughly to care about everyone equally. Like to say that your life is worth no more or less than my own life or anybody else's life, even all around the world and into future generations. Like just because somebody was born 20 years from now or 100 years from now doesn't make their life worth any more or less than our own lives. And this being a view about ethics, about what's good and bad, you can agree or disagree with that, but this is the perspective that I personally have found very compelling and has been really a strong guide for my own work that I've done. And so what does that have to do about global catastrophic risk? So a global catastrophe is anything that would cause massive harm worldwide. And as far as how massive it has to be to count as a global catastrophe, there's different definitions out there. But I like to think of it as being something analogous to the complete destruction of global human civilization. And it's so important because this is something that would have a massive effect on pretty much everybody alive around the world. Even if there's some survivors, they're left living just a radically deteriorated life compared to what we have now. And it also bodes very poorly for anybody who might live in the future. I mean, the extreme case would be if the event causes the extinction of the human species, then of course, well, there wouldn't be any future generations. But even if there are some survivors, they may have diminished prospects into the future, and human civilization might or might not ever recover. And so this is something that, well, if you want to make the world a better place, you care about everyone equally, avoiding global catastrophe is a really good place to start. And okay, you might not be able to reduce a global catastrophe, or excuse me, prevent a global catastrophe every day. Most days there aren't any civilization-ending global catastrophes. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. But we may be able to do things that reduce the risk by at least a little bit. Maybe make it less likely that a global catastrophe would occur, or in the horrible event that one were to occur, make things go however much better for the survivors, so that there is some hope for them to rebuild civilization and carry on and so forth. It's not exactly a happy topic, and people ask me all the time, like, so am I constantly depressed and gloomy and so on, and I'm actually not. I think on a day-to-day basis, there's a sense in which, like, it's just a job. I think I would have a much more difficult time with something like being an emergency room doctor or nurse or so, where it's much more emotional. For the work that I do, it's a lot more abstract. And well, I also get to, I get to take some comfort in recognizing that I'm doing something to help on this. So anyway, that's the concept of global catastrophic risk. And then I should say, get into what it means to work on the risk and address it. And the first concept that I really want to emphasize here is on the distinction between risks and decisions. A big pitfall that is easy to fall into when looking at a topic like global catastrophic risk is to focus really on the risks themselves. And we can talk about, I'll get into the risks themselves in a minute, because it is important to understand what the risks may be. At the same time, there's a sense in which the risks themselves are not the important part. The important part is what I or other people may be able to do about it. If you think about it kind of conceptually, if there is a really big, massive, important issue that the world faces, whether it's a risk, whether it's some other type of issue, what have you, really obviously just like huge issue, when your own personal circumstances can't really do much about it, then that's probably not the right thing for you to focus on. Instead, it would be better to focus on maybe a smaller issue, not quite as important in the grand scheme of things, but where you personally can have a bigger impact on it, because that's where you're going to be contributing more to making the world a better place, or whatever, advancing whatever moral values you're seeking to advance. And so same thing here with the risks. We can look at the risks. We need to understand the risks in order to have a sense for where the opportunities lie. But it's important to keep in perspective that the risks matter to the extent that they affect the decisions that we might be making, the actions that we take, the opportunities that we would have to address them. And so with that in mind, let me say a little bit about the risks, and then I'll say a bit more on the opportunities that are out there to address the risks. So first, there are environmental risks. Climate change is probably the most important of these, but there is a whole confluence of environmental change related to biodiversity loss, certain depletion of certain resources, phosphorus, things like that, that are all just this big confluence of global environmental degradation. It is clear that the environment is being degraded worldwide, and that's causing a whole range of problems. It is less clear whether or not this environmental degradation is likely to result in the collapse of global human civilization. It is possible that, as bad as climate change, et cetera, obviously is, civilization as a whole might be able to survive it. It may hurt, we may have a more limited civilization, but we may still have something. And in fact, I would say that is the general best guess from people who study climate change, that this is going to be absolutely horrible. Civilization's probably going to survive it. At the same time, there is some uncertainty here. And this is a general theme within the study of global catastrophic risk. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's not like the risk of something that happens all the time. If you want to know the risk of you dying in a car crash, I mean, presumably you personally have never died in a car crash before. You can speak for yourself on this, but a lot of other people have, unfortunately, and there's a lot of data about how often people die in car crashes, under what circumstances, how old they are, where they live, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what insurance companies use to decide how much money to charge for car insurance, life insurance, things of that sort. We don't have that with global catastrophic risk. We don't have loads of data on all of the previous times in which global human civilization has collapsed. It's never really happened before. Doesn't mean it can't happen. It does, however, mean that there's a lot of uncertainty about it. And we see that with climate change, where we're basically certain that the climate is changing, that it's causing problems, is harming the global human population, as well as populations of other species, ecosystems, et cetera. That much is clear. As far as how bad it's going to be, less clear. But as long as there is some chance that climate change may either directly cause the collapse of global human civilization or contribute to it through intersections with other factors, we'll talk about some of them in a minute, then you would put that within the scope of global catastrophic risk. So on to other types of risks. Pandemics is a big one, and this includes both natural pandemics, COVID-19, but imagine if COVID-19 was a lot worse than it actually was, which I know is kind of ridiculous because COVID-19 was quite horrible, but it never really came close to destroying all of global human civilization. Even where the disease spread in its most extreme forms, the large majority of people survived. The disabilities, very significant, long COVID, et cetera, quite horrible, but civilization is still functional. And so we can imagine pandemics that are substantially more severe than COVID-19, and that could include both pathogens that reach humanity kind of accidentally from nature, as well as pathogens that human activity plays some role in creating through biomedical research and things of that sort. And there's again uncertainty about what the worst case scenarios for pandemics may be, but for a pandemic that is able to spread around the world as readily as COVID-19 and also cause even more severe harm, medical harm than COVID-19, then yeah, this seems quite possible. Then another one would be nuclear war. With nuclear war, there's the risk from the local destruction of the nuclear weapons themselves, and then there is also the global effects of it, with the biggest one being, it's called nuclear winter. Essentially, when you bomb a city with nuclear weapons, the explosion is so big that some of the smoke from the burning of the city goes up to the stratosphere, which is the second level of the atmosphere, It's up above the clouds, and because it's above the clouds, it doesn't get washed out in the rain. And so it'll actually stay up there for months or years, could even be 10 or 15 years. And while it's up there, it blocks incoming sunlight, which makes the surface of the planet cooler. So it'll spread all around the world, blocking sunlight, making the surface cooler, hence the name nuclear winter. And that can make it more difficult to grow food and cause other sorts of harm all around the world, even for countries that had nothing to do with the conflict. What are the odds of ending up in a nuclear war? Another one, not an easy question to answer, but as long as we still have conflicts like the ongoing war in Ukraine, and there remain adversarial relations between the countries that have nuclear weapons, and this remains a very serious possibility, then there are risks from artificial intelligence. This had been a bit of a niche, obscure topic for many years, and just within the last 6 or 12 months or so, it's really become a lot more mainstream, thanks to the rise of generative AI, the large language models, things like ChatGPT. Perhaps you've heard about it in the news, perhaps you've encountered it in your own activities. My own read of it is that while the current technology is very impressive, it's unlikely to cause any sort of significant global catastrophe. There is, however, concern that as the technology continues to advance, that we may end up with technology that could essentially outsmart humanity, take over the world, and kill everyone, which is, long-standing theme of some wonderful science fiction, but this might actually happen. And so there are questions of how do you prevent that happening. It's basically, you don't build that type of AI, or if you build anything along those lines, you make sure it has very robust safety features built into it, so this wouldn't happen. And then finally, you have other ones like natural disasters, asteroids, getting hit by a large asteroid, like what we believe happened to the dinosaurs, massive volcano eruptions, things like that. They might or might not happen very often, that we have better data on from the deep history of Earth, but those are also risks that can be quite significant. Now, let's talk about opportunities to reduce them, and we can get into specifics for each risk, like related to climate change, environmental degradation, clean energy, redesigning cities so people don't need to drive everywhere while still enjoying their lives, having remote events like this one, instead of putting people in airplanes just to go places. Airplane travel, unfortunately, is actually a massive emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, and so is agriculture, in particular livestock. And so having plant-based diets, or what was the last item that the previous speaker presented on, cultivating essentially meat without the animal, I'm pretty sure that could also offer significant environmental benefits. And then there are a lot of cross-cutting opportunities, things like improving international relations. Like if you improve the relationship between, say, the United States and Russia, then that would be of major value for reducing the risk of nuclear war, but it would also be of value for a wide range of other things, having better international cooperation on potentially even the entire list of global catastrophic risks, and a sizable number of other major issues. Now, improving relations with Russia at the moment is a bit of a challenging one, given Russia's utterly atrocious behavior in Ukraine, and it's really just horrible what Russia's been doing. And it's good that Ukraine, with a lot of international support, has been fighting back against the awful things that Russia has been doing. But I see a need for a long-term vision for repairing relations between these countries, and also improving relations between other countries, say the United States and China, India and Pakistan, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of work that can and probably should be done on that front that can help across a range of global catastrophic risks and other issues at the same time. And another major area is the governance of science and technology. A lot of the risks involve various aspects of science and technology, something like pandemics. You certainly want to have good governance of the labs that have the potential to create or enhance dangerous pathogens, but also the corners of science and technology that are involved in responding to pandemics. Same thing for the technologies involved in climate change, environmental issues, same thing for artificial intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a lot of really important cross-cutting work to be done in the realm of improving governance of science and technology. And a final point that I really want to stress here is that there are important synergies between addressing global catastrophic risk and addressing other issues that people care about across society. There is a case to be made from a very particular moral perspective for focusing on global catastrophic risk. That's what I outlined at the beginning of my remarks. But at the same time, we live in a large and pluralistic society. A lot of people care about a lot of different issues, and not everybody is going to be focused on global catastrophic risk in the same way. And so for that reason, there's a lot of value in recognizing the synergies between global catastrophic risk and whatever else people care about. And actually, the first talk gave some good illustration of how to go about doing that, noting that, okay, so we recognize that having meat consumption is really bad for the environment. What is it that people value related to meat consumption, and how can we work with that in order to find solutions that people will actually be willing to implement? Because you can have a great idea, like just go vegan, and if people aren't going to do it, then what difference does it make? People will go vegan or go in the direction of being vegan and stuff like that. That does happen. It's not like we should throw that solution out. But then it's a question of, okay, so what is it that might bring people to go vegan? Or in the cases where they won't, what will they do? And so what are the options there? That type of perspective really holds across a lot of different issues, including the range of different global catastrophic risks. So for example, in the ongoing war with Ukraine, with the risk of that escalating to nuclear war, you can try just asking Russia to knock it off and leave Ukraine and end the war and make sure, ask it to never use nuclear weapons and so on. But it's not like I got Vladimir Putin on speed dial, right? And in general, there's limits to how much, say, the United States is able to do in pressuring Russia and its behavior. There are some things, but we're on the opposite side of a major violent conflict, and there's limits to how much they're going to listen to us. On the other hand, there are kind of intermediate countries that will listen to us and that Russia will listen to. India and China are the two big ones, but all across the world, there are a lot of countries that are not as aggressively aligned with Ukraine on this conflict, countries across Africa, lots of Asia, Latin America, and so on. And there's a lot of opportunity that we have to push those countries to push Russia. That's a mechanism that can actually work for reducing the risk of nuclear war. And in fact, this has been happening. This has been a really high value activity that's been going on throughout the war. And in fact, I would say it had a substantial effect on reducing the risk of nuclear war now as compared to earlier in the conflict. And so it's another good example of looking at it in terms of, so what in practice actually works? And this is a big challenge to go from these really abstract moral philosophy concepts related to making the world a better place to very specific actions for how to address the risk. But if we want to actually address the risk and not just think about it as like an intellectual concept, then that's what we need to do. And likewise, just to wrap up, my big advice for students would be to follow a course of study that works well for you and that gives you opportunities to, if you're interested in working on global catastrophic risk, to find intersections between your own opportunities and the risks themselves. There is no one correct path to working on global catastrophic risk. I have a really weird background. Lots of people who work on it have completely different backgrounds than I do, and that's fine. Because the work to be done is so multifaceted, having an interdisciplinary background, really valuable, but there are a lot of different ways to approach it. My organization, the Global Catastrophic Risk Institute, does an annual program on advising and collaboration. And so anybody who's interested in getting more involved in global catastrophic risk can try to participate in that program. We'll probably be opening it up sometime within the next month or two. Our website is gcrinstitute.org, and you can poke around and find our advising and collaboration program there, or just sign up for our newsletter, and we'll send an email out when it's ready. And so I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation on global catastrophic risk and your in-depth background information to your ascent into your career. I think your story and goals are something a lot of our members can relate to. The combination of like STEM and humanities is a major pillar of our organization. And your presentation really provides like a real life example of how this can manifest. So with that being said, thank you both for your unique and informational discussions on both alternative proteins and global catastrophes, without examples of how students can involve themselves in such like altruistic endeavors. We will now take time for our Q&A session. The chats are going to open momentarily, so please type any questions or comments there for us to ask the speakers. Or as always, you can unmute if you feel comfortable doing that. Oh, additionally, they had both wrote in the chat, Nathan had shared something about like how cultivated meat does in fact improve environmental sustainability, and Seth had also linked his organization. So we really appreciate you guys like engaging the students with that. Justin, is the chat open for?
Yes, I think
right, cool.
it should be open.
Got it. So you guys are welcome to post in there right now. Okay, so we have first two questions. So when comparing the different methods of producing alternative proteins, which method is most effective and most resembles traditional animal grown products? So this one is for Nathan.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to part of what your second question alludes to, of just like, at a certain point, there's also the practical nature of it. So as I had said with cultivated meat, that really just is meat. It's the same cells, muscle, fat, connective tissue. So that definitely, once it is available, will be most closely resembling traditional animal products, because that's what it is. Now, to actually do that in a way that all of the cells line up in the same way, all the muscle is encapsulated in connective tissue, that's really hard, and that's really expensive. We can do it, but again, the first cultivated burger was like $100,000. That's not exactly competing on taste, or at least on price. I don't think it actually competed on taste at that point either, because they were still figuring some stuff out. That said, kind of what I alluded to with using precision fermentation as enabling technologies allows for a lot closer of replication, especially of taste, in plant-based products, like the Impossible having the heme, the soy-like hemoglobin, replicates what a rare or medium rare hamburger would taste like, because it has that iron tang. So kind of a cultivated meat is the best replication, because that's what it is, but combining the technologies will probably be the most effective in the real world. As for the second question, associated with different safety concerns, I will actually, once I'm done talking, I will pull up a resource from the FAO, the Food Agriculture Organization, I think, of the UN, that recently published a full report of the risks associated with cultivated meat. And they basically found that there's not anything different as compared to other means of food production. So I mean, there are still risks. There's risks of contamination. There's risks of like chemicals that you don't want to get in there, but it is not unique to the production of cultivated meat, which is both, I mean, really exciting. And, we just need to be as diligent as normal when producing those. In terms of the larger scale, in certain ways, it actually makes it easier because on an industrial scale, there is just like the increase in output so that if basically anything happens, it becomes really obvious. If anyone has worked with cell culture, you'll know if there is contamination, it will tell you. You don't need to go looking for it. And yes, so I will go hunt down that link and wait for the next question.
Thank you for your response. Yeah, she said thank you as well. If anyone else has more questions, please type in the chat.
So I actually have a question for Seth, specifically with how you're evaluating global priorities. Is there like a, I guess, ranking system, or like how do you use the evidence to support or justify which catastrophes you would give preference to addressing?
That's a good question. This is something that comes up a lot. And I would refer back to the distinction between risks and decisions. Ultimately, we should not be trying to rank the risks. We should be trying to rank the opportunities that we have to address the risks to the extent that we're focused on that. And there are opportunities for which having that sort of comparison isn't even all that important. Like, should we be trying to improve international relations, for example? This helps across a range of risks, doesn't really have any downsides. If you look hard enough, maybe you can find some downsides, but in general, this is not something that has lots of downsides. And so having that ranking or comparison of risks is less important for it. Is trying to improve international relations worthy of your time or somebody else's time? That would, I would say, depend on the particulars of the opportunities that you have versus other sorts of things that you may be able to do with your time. And this gets into much more detailed questions about the opportunity spaces that are available to each of us, and that can be different from person to person. How do we, just as a kind of a conceptual risk analysis question, how would we go about comparing what the risks may be? And this also applies to comparing the opportunities that we have to address the risks. So the first of all is it's not an easy thing to do, and it's because these are so difficult to quantify. Like, if you want to compare the risk of dying in a car crash to the risk of dying in a plane crash, we've got data on that. In general, the risk of dying in a car crash is higher. For most people, it's quite a lot higher, unless you're somebody who never goes anywhere near cars, but you get in planes a lot, in which case, maybe your risk is different. What's the risk of global catastrophe from, say, climate change versus from nuclear war? Well, okay, so one complication is that those are not necessarily completely distinct risks. It's possible that as climate change gets worse, that could put stresses on different countries, including countries that have nuclear weapons. For example, there's going to be, there already are, but the impacts of climate change in the South Asian subcontinent, that's one of the parts of the world that is projected to get hit relatively hard. And how will that intersect with the nuclear tensions that already exist between India and Pakistan? But even setting those sort of interconnections aside, it's really difficult to compare these two risks in terms of like which one is more likely to cause the collapse of global human civilization, because we don't have the data on that. And so how we evaluate it is we pull together as much evidence and information as we can. Like in the study of climate change, we understand some basics of how the climate system works. We understand some things about how human populations around the world are affected by different changes in climate. And we know that just from the ordinary fluctuations that human populations have already endured. And we try to extrapolate as well as we can. It's not an exact science, but that's what we're able to do. And for nuclear war, like, what are the odds that some particular world leader will make the decision to order the launch of nuclear weapons, and then what's the odds that order will actually be followed? It's generally assumed that the orders will probably be followed, but the odds of somebody making that decision, like what's going on inside Vladimir Putin's funny little head, like we don't really know, let alone what will be going on inside the heads of future leaders who aren't yet in power, and we don't know who they're going to be. Like that, it's really hard to assess things like that, and it's the sort of thing that needs to be approached with a lot of humility. And the same thing, frankly, applies to how we evaluate the opportunities that we have to work on the risks. That said, there can be things that end up standing out, and the most general advice I can give on this is to just start learning more. That's really always a good starting point. Like, I can make specific suggestions that people can do right now. A lot of things like, switching toward a plant-based diet or to alternative proteins, things like that, like to the extent that's something that, each of us can do even on a day-to-day basis. That's an easy one. It doesn't solve the entire problem all at once, but it's still something that we can do. Kind of might as well if we're comfortable doing that. And beyond that, as you learn the overall space of the risks and the opportunities, and then relate that to your own particular capabilities, things you're studying, things you're good at, stuff like that. That's really the general approach to how to find one's role in this space. And even then, like, I've been doing this for, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so, and I'm still sorting out how best do I fit in. And that's something that's constantly evolving, even for me, having done this for a long time. I think that's just an inevitable aspect of this type of work. It's just it's difficult to pin down like the one right thing to do on it.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I know Seth had already touched on this quite a bit about like what students can do like right now to like get more into like the fields that he had discussed. But for Nathan, like what would you like suggest someone who's interested in like alternative proteins to do right now and leading into their career to like be more involved?
I love that question. One of the things that is a simultaneous blessing and a curse is how interdisciplinary alternative proteins are as a field. I mean, no different than what Seth was talking about. And what that means is basically no matter what you want to specialize in, whatever you feel like you're good at, there is a place for you. It also means that it can be hard to find how that fits. The good thing about this being such a new field is that there are so many people who are running companies, like sometimes in the C-suites, they're directors of whatever you want to say, and they're still small enough companies that they are excited to talk to students. And I'm not just saying this like as a hypothetical. I directly connect students with directors of marketing, directors of science and research at companies, whether they be cultivated meat companies, plant-based companies, and they get responses. And sometimes it's, bringing those people onto panel discussions or presentations for the work they're doing with the Alt Protein Project, or just one-on-one mentoring. And so what I would recommend would be, look into some companies or maybe some university laboratories that is doing work that you're really interested in, and just reach out. It is frankly shocking to me how high of a hit rate people have when they just cold email, cold message on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's a really great sorry, 1 second, my notifications are going off. That's a really great like opportunity for a lot of students. I appreciate you sharing that with us. We have another question in the chat. This one's for Seth. How effective have non-government organizations been addressing global concerns, and what barriers do they face in foreign countries that hinders their success?
It's a great question. So the first one is it depends on which foreign countries. Working in an NGO in, say, Denmark is very different than the same thing in, say, North Korea. The opportunities there are just going to be very, very different. But overall, NGOs have unambiguously important roles to play across a wide range of aspects of global catastrophic risks, across different types of activities to address the risks. And they have played roles in research and understanding the risks, supporting what goes on within academia, doing independent research. That's very much part of it. Especially a lot of what comes out of academia tends to be more theoretical, and NGOs have done really crucial work in translating that into more practical decision making, which is really essential for making progress on the risks, and also have played important roles in agenda setting. Agenda setting is a really important type of activity to play. And say, there might be some degree of consensus on what to do, but there might not be much consensus on how much attention to pay to it in the first place. So think about all the work that has been done over the years to get climate change onto onto the policy agenda. NGOs have been absolutely central to that sort of effort. In fact, have in many cases probably been more successful at this in other countries than they have in the United States. The United States has very challenging politics with respect to climate change. It's probably the polite way of putting it. And then there are similar roles across a range of different issues. We are right now starting to see some of this playing out on artificial intelligence, where NGOs that have been active on AI for some years are like having kind of a moment of opportunity in which there is a lot more mainstream interest in the work that they're doing. And this includes, to some extent, my organization, but also a lot of colleagues of ours have really been having a major contribution to the ongoing public conversation about AI. And that's really high value work. One disappointment, I would say, has been the lack of NGO activity on improving international relations. It's been a theme in my remarks about the considerable value of working to improve relations between the countries that currently have major tensions, like the US-Russia, US-China, those sorts of relations. And frankly, I feel like there is just not nearly as much going on that front as there could be or should be. And there have been some NGOs that would seem like obvious candidates to do that type of work, but have not actually been doing it. It's been really a disappointment of mine. And I think this is something that there really is a good opportunity to do more on, especially for people who have backgrounds in international relations and related sorts of like conflict resolution topics. And that's something that really has to be international in scope. If you just have US NGOs working on that, then you're not going to make the progress that you need. What you really need is collaboration and dialogue between NGOs across the relevant countries, which is easier said than done. The NGO scene in Russia, for example, is it's a very challenging one at this time, but we really need to lay the groundwork for that, and can really include NGOs from almost any country around the world for things like that.
Okay, thank you so much for that in-depth response. And since we have gone over the time, we are not going to take any more questions at this moment, but if it's okay with both of you, would it be, if they have any more further questions, would they be able to email you then? Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Anyone who does not want to stay any further, you're welcome to leave. We greatly appreciate both your presentations, and we greatly appreciate like how you're able to go so far in depth with them, like connect with our students and engage them.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for having us. There's been some great questions too.
Yeah,
This concludes our webinar. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
appreciate it.